Are you a spy?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to everybody who's watching this podcast. And I would like to introduce in a minute my friend and colleague Andrew Hayward. But first of all, I'd like to ask you to um, click on the like button to share this video with your friends, family, anybody else that you think might be interested in learning about book promotion. And also click on the notification button so that you can get notified when the next video comes up. So without further ado, um, hello Andy. Thank you for agreeing to be on the podcast.
Okay, before we go on, very quickly, can I just say hello, people, or rather, but also to apologise because I'm deaf. So if I don't hear Chris, that that my fault. A lovely little story from Alan Bennett, which bears on this, which where he was in a bookshop in Southwold with his companion Rupert, and he asked this chap in the bookshop. He said, "What do you do?" And the bloke said, "I'm a painter. I'm an artist. Beg your pardon. I am an artist." And if he said, "Oh, what do you paint?" And he said, "Ramsgate." And Bennett said, "Well, we were in Ramsgate 3 weeks ago, weren't we, Rupert?" And Rupert said, "Landscapes, darling." He said, "Landscapes." Wonderful. So I'm in good company being deaf.
Uh, right, yeah, thank you. Um, Yeah, I'm just fiddling with the technology a little bit, but hopefully things will be working now. Um, so, Andy, tell me and the audience a little bit about your experience in publishing, as to why you're the ideal guest to talk about generic book promotion.
Well, I started off at Lutterworth before I went to university. After university, big stroke of luck, managed to get a job at Penguin. And basically, my career is at Penguin, Pearson, where I was seconded to for a while, and then Constable and Robinson. And then I finally ended up at Summersdale for a year or so after I went deaf, doing bits and pieces for Alistair. Um, and then I got involved with a thing called Ether, which was basically a startup where we were trying to get publishers to give us details for their new fiction coming out because publishers post 2008-9 have really suffered as regards getting new fiction off the ground. Very, very difficult. Can I just give a quote really from my talk on the history of publishing? It's that basically after 2010, we lost 20% of our libraries, 20% of actual buildings. And then as regards the buying went down by 85% because money was being spent on other disciplines within the library, computer services, etc., etc. It's been very difficult for people to push off new fiction. You had to be very careful. It used to be you would throw 5 or 6 novels at the wall, and you would see which one was sticking, and then you would pile in behind it, and that was the basic operation. And post 2010, that no longer worked. You had to be actually much more astute about what you actually were publishing and how you published it.
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction. I mean, as well as that, you've also, I remember you had years ago, you got a book festival going in London. And also, you and I worked very closely together, pounding the streets, talking to publishers, booksellers, librarians, agents, and so on about the UK book trade, trying to get them to celebrate World Book Day years ago. And you and I were responsible for getting people interested in that.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the book trade is I mean, the other thing about that 2010, 2009 crash is that all the chains that were there before have gone. Ottakers, etc., Borders, Blackwells, etc. It's just Waterstones. And then increasingly good news is that kind of independents are springing up as well and doing their own thing and having to be imaginative and innovative to get customers in and get the income in. But I do, my big beef really with publishing, and the one thing I think we discovered when we were doing Booksen and we were doing the World Book Day, our little committee worked for 3 years to get to a point where we needed a big name. And thank God for Gail Rebuck coming in because she was the one who got us over the line. And I've never reached those giddy heights. But one of the things that really makes me angry or frustrated is that I think that publishing doesn't push the worthwhile value of books and how important they are because they change people, they change nations almost. And I think that is something that we do not get across. And I think it's also in the day and age of the internet. Um, I just said to you before we came on air, I stopped doing any politics or economics or whatever on the internet in 2010. I was talking to a guy called Steve from Hitchin, who came up with some ideas about why the financial crash came. And I said, where are you getting that from? What book? He said, I got it off the internet, mate. And I said, you've got no provenance for that. If you've got a book, the guy who's written it or the people who've written it have
Yeah.
literally taken years to put the stuff together and to write it, and you know where they're coming from. And that's why we're getting so much malinformation and so much wrong information. You just have, I'm not going to bore you now, but the malinformation in America over the Trump election, unbelievable,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah. No, I know someone who was an editor at the Oxford English Dictionary, and they said to me once that the reason they have a print edition, even now, of the full dictionary, is that it takes 10 years to do a new edition, and they go through the alphabet systematically. But the point is, if you print a definition and you don't then get the opportunity to change or edit your definition that you've printed, you have to wait 10 years before you can change it. And so if you're putting something into print where you know that you can't change it for that length of time, then you pretty well, you've got to get it right. Otherwise, it's really, really expensive. So the reason having something like the Oxford English Dictionary in print means that it is very, very authoritative, and you can rely on it because of the fact that the cost of getting it wrong is so high. And I think that goes for from what you were saying about the politics as well. I mean, if somebody puts a fact in a book and it's incorrect, then you soon know about it, or you get sued, or whatever.
Well, I think the interesting thing is picking up on the politics thing because I think that is an important thing as regards book publishing or science or whatever. Important part of book publishing, which is you're getting an authentic record. But in the last 48 hours, I've had 2 conversations with friends about podcasts, which people are really following and picking up on, and there is a thirst for intelligent conversations which the internet doesn't give you because it's just secondhand rubbish.
And I guess the social media, if you say something, you can only put bite-sized nuggets of information into social media, and by the time you've done that, the whole world kind of reacts to you. Whereas as a book, it's like a long-form monologue of one person's ideas and insights. And so, your reaction to a book is essentially an internal reaction as you're reading it. and it's only you could send an email to the author via a website to say how much you've enjoyed it, or you could put a review on Amazon or that kind of thing. But there isn't that kind of immediate sense of being able to weigh in with an opinion or a take immediately you read something.
It is. I think, and I think also, I mean, the other interesting thing is about all of this is that I met a friend who I used to work with, and I said, "What are you doing now?" And are you still editing? She was an editor at Bloomsbury, and she said, "No, I'm a writer." And I said, "All right." And I said, "Who's your publisher?" And she said, "Well, I don't have one. I self-publish, and I sell the books at £1.49 on Amazon." And I can remember thinking, not sure what your figures are, but she's an incredibly bright woman,
Mm.
and I think you must be doing okay. And then she said, "I'm selling 50,000 of each book, and I do two." Yeah, bloody hell, that is extraordinary. And we had a conversation, and we met again a few months later, and we had another coffee, and she said, "I've done what you suggested." And I said, "Well, I suggested you're earning more money than I've ever earned in my life. You don't need my advice." And she said, "Well, no, because you said you need to find a publisher now because you don't have the connections to sell the rights. You don't have the connections to get into the Edinburgh Book Festival or to Hale or whatever." And this is the point. The final point is you're not going to get in stock promotions because you're not in the bookshops.
Right.
There is so much stuff. I mean, Waterstones are basically the doorkeepers of new publishing in this country. If you don't
Yeah,
get
yeah,
into
yeah.
Waterstones, you're going to have a real problem breaking out. And that really is very, very difficult. And I think that is a problem when you're talking about generic promotions. That really is a problem.
Yeah, although I guess if you're self-published, you could have the best of both worlds, where you publish one strand of books. I don't know whether this lady was non-fiction or fiction, but you could have a particular theme that you then sold to the publisher to be traditionally published, and then you have your own website, and then you can self-publish everything else that you do. So it's just, I mean, you get the best of both worlds. You can get the brand recognition and the the name recognition in the marketplace, and then you can flog things online, self-published stuff as well.
Well, one of the things I want to do, even when we're doing World Book Day, I've always had this thing at the back of my mind, and I'm going to put it out there now because somebody might listen might think, actually, hey, he's got quite a good idea there. The idea is that you're sitting in an airport and the announcement comes out and says your flight's been delayed for half an hour or whatever, and the people reading the magazines throw their magazines down. That's it. Oh, sorry, reading the paper, read them, throw the paper down. Then it's delayed for another half an hour, reading a magazine, throw the magazine down. And then the call is called, your flight's now being called, and all the people reading their book are still engrossed in the book. And the shout line is for a better bargain, buy a book. And that way you're actually also coming to a demographic who you actually, we both know if somebody actually comes up and says, "We've got a place airside, W.H. Smith airside," then yes, you're going to get quite a lot of copy sold just by the sheer dent. You don't have the competition across the shops that you do if you go into Waterson's Trafalgar Square or you go into some of these other shops or you go into a Robert Topping shop which is packed full of books or whatever. But W.H. Smith Airside is specific. They know what they're wanting to sell, and by God, they sell it. And you got a winner.
Yeah, and those are some of the most popular, profitable rather, outlets that WH Smith has. In airports and train stations and things, because you've got a captive audience, haven't you?
Yes, you
Who
have.
need for the flight,
Well, we're just trying to sell a book and a film at the moment. Oh, we're trying to sell the film rights because we've got a publisher who's interested in the book. I mean, you say it won't happen. I did say to the publisher, look, I have to be honest. 900 times out of 1,000, it's not going to happen. But the fact that it's Sky, as it happens, have come and said we're quite interested in exploring this project, gives you a bit of kudos. If it does take off, that'll be
Yeah.
fantastic. But for once in my life, I'm being realistic and thinking it probably won't happen. But you never know.
Well, one of the ambitions of this podcast, Andy, I mean, we touched on this a little bit, is that there is a problem with reading for pleasure. There's been a number of studies recently which have said that people are reading for pleasure less than they have been. Although you have an anecdote about Gen Z, maybe you'd like to share that.
And again, so the last bit.
You were saying that Gen Z are getting fed up with their phones and they want to read things in print now.
Yes, but it's like it's like anything, any product in one sense. It's about sharing the enthusiasm for it, and particularly with books, and particularly at this time of year. I can well remember sitting down with a guy called John Lee, who was the rep for Macmillan at Selfridges, and it happened they had a big book department now, all these books, and as the rep, even I, Mr. Optimist, as Nick Robinson called me, I'd sit there and think, my God, there's a lot of returns here. And 3 or 4 days before Christmas, there'd be these great piles. And then you go in after Christmas, you say, oh, okay, I'll sign the return. You think, by me, they've sold most of them. It's extraordinary. There is that thing. And I think, dear old John up at the top, books had a crow on the hill. Plowing his lonely furrow, but doing really well. And some days you walk past, leading up to Christmas, and it's a packed shop, and you think, yeah, good for you, mate. Pack it in, get
Well, I
the
guess
money.
they must know what they're doing as booksellers. That's interesting. But yeah,
I think the other thing is about sharing. It's the book program now that they have on BBC Two with a kind of a book club thing. I think these things go in cycles. I mean, there was one point when we were doing Book Day. There were about 3 or 4 programs, and we actually also had, if you recall, the program, or you did it,
yeah,
the program on ITV, Your Booked.
that's right. That's right.
Which again, this is really interesting because I got kudos at Penguin because none of the other companies really followed us for the first 3 or 4 weeks, did they?
No.
It was all Penguin authors. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Peter Mayer said, do you pay for that? I said, no, it's just the others are not interested, Peter.
So that's why John Bond was so keen on us.
What it is, I mean, and that's also why, having suffered with the ether, we didn't get it off the ground. We did have 1 or 2 successes, but we didn't get it off the ground. I have a huge respect for Peter Florence down at Hay. And I can remember when he first started, and people saying, well, I don't want to go down Hay. Why do you want to go all out there? And now, as we know, it's a global attraction.
Well, yeah.
But that's his drive and his vision. And you think,
yeah,
good for you,
I
Peter.
mean, he was also helped. I mean, I appreciate Peter did an amazing job to get that off the ground, but in terms of PR and sort of being an adult, I mean, Richard Booth was the master of that, wasn't he?
Well, that actually is the other interesting thing. Bizarrely, after I left Councillor Robinson, some people know this, some people don't, but I went totally deaf at Councillor Robinson. That's the problem with this. And bizarrely, and I didn't put that in the bookseller when I left, saying, I've gone deaf. And I did get a couple of job offers, and one of which was the Bath Festival. They said, would you be interested? And in the end, I didn't get it. I went to somebody else. I went to Guildford. Didn't get that one, although the chap who got it, interestingly enough, rang up afterwards. This is a good story. He said, I'm sorry you didn't get the job. They said, they've given it to me. And I said, yes, well done. He said, well, they said you had some very good ideas. You wouldn't like to share them with me. And I said, I'm a very charitable chap. And actually, no. But the point of the story was, as great friend Andrew Stuck, he said, what you should do, look around the country and find out where you think they should have a book festival and there's not a book festival. And honest to God, there's hardly anywhere that's not covered by a book festival. Most places have got a book festival, and I find that incredibly encouraging.
Yes.
And there's some great book festivals. There certainly are. I mean, the Chalk History Festival is fantastic. Uh, Dartington, Hay, Edinburgh, of course. It really fills you with hope.
Do you think, I mean, one of the things about book festivals is there was a kind of activist campaign last year to complain about one of the sponsors, the Bailey Gifford sponsor, because of the perceived investment that that company had had in some things that the activists didn't like. And as a result, that sponsor has dropped out of lots of book
Yeah.
festivals. And I was wondering what you felt about, how viable, lots and lots of book festivals might be, because they're going to need to find alternative sources of funding.
Well, what you're doing with Iceland, I mean, can you incorporate that into the UK? Could you take aspects of
That's,
that?
that's, that's exactly what this podcast is all about, Andy. Yeah. So it's sort of popularizing the idea of Jolabokaflod as a means of gifting books, and developing the idea that reading for pleasure is a really good thing to choose to do as a kind of leisure activity. And that's the reason I'm doing these podcasts, Andy. That it's the, this pre-Christmas period is are the first of what I hope to be a weekly podcast, or maybe even twice weekly. I mean, you mentioned your book, the, the television program that I was a producer on. I'm going to bring that back as one of the strands of this podcast. So, authors can come on, talk about their book, and I can green screen an image of the cover of their book behind me, so that my background can be their book. In the way at the moment, my background is this very nice living room. So I can change the background.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, because the thing in Iceland is about trying to send a book for a present, isn't it, and spread the word really. And
That's right.
yeah, um,
So
and I mean, again, people are always amazed at how many English language books are sold abroad in other countries. I remember Tim Alderson ringing me up when we were doing a consultancy for a company. He wasn't a publisher, but this company actually had a few books in English, and he said they sell about 5,000 copies out. He said, is that good, or is that tail end Charlie? I said, oh, geez, 5,000. That's a tail end Charlie, isn't it? He said, is it? I said, what's our population? He said, about 68 million. I said, yes. And I said, actually, there's some really good sales in Holland and Scandinavia as well, because a lot of those people. And I said, a friend of mine sold an awful lot of copies of Revenant Hamlet at that point in Germany. He said, oh, so 5,000 is nothing. I said, no, 5,000 is about standard.
it depends on,
Really took him by surprise.
was that hardback or paperback?
That's when you're getting something off the ground. That's the thing with when we did the library supplies. Um,
Yeah.
they really were the bread and butter, because 1850, when they started the Library Act, and they put money in it, and there were libraries going up over the north, and the first library actually was down in Winchester, but then there was Oldham, Wigan, all the rest of it. 1900, I think it was, the government introduced a rule saying that libraries must buy book from the publishers. Well, we were a much smaller industry then. Um, but it continues, and you'd always get a certain core number of books into the libraries, and
That's
off
right.
they would. You didn't even print them. You printed them. You didn't even bind them. You sent them as sheets. You gave them 48% discount, which of course nowadays is kind
Wow.
of unbelievable. Yes, and off they went. So you were sort of getting your money back, basically. or getting most of it back
Yeah,
from the libraries. If you didn't sell anything through the bookshops because people hadn't heard of Andy Hayward or Chris Norris or whatever, then it didn't really matter. It wasn't such a big loss. But it's as I say, that's gone. So different ways
yeah.
of working.
I mean and that's one big reason why publishing is these days tends to be driven either by very well-known authors, celebrity authors, or people who are debut authors that you can build a buzz around.
Yeah.
What used to be called the mid-list has largely disappeared, hasn't it? So, and maybe one of the big reasons is that, as you say, that license sales are much less than they were.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting.
It's hard. I'm very glad I'm not responsible for sales and marketing nowadays. I must admit.
Well, I don't know, Andy. I mean, you were always very good at identifying things that people would find interesting in terms of commissioning things and the sales potential for the books that particularly when you were at Constable,
Yes.
you were very good at finding winners.
I do wish that there were more book programs on radio or whatever. But then, having said that, that maybe is very old-fashioned because the podcasts are doing it for you. I mean, I was talking with Edward last night, who telling me about a economics history podcast, which is absolutely fantastic, which I will now follow up on, and I will probably go and get one of the contributors, a Cambridge professor. I will probably go and get her book because that sounds really interesting because she's followed economic development through
Yes.
the development of oil. So you think, okay, that's the prism that we look at it.
Just to explain to viewers, you did a degree in
Yeah.
economics and politics, which is why one of the reasons you're interested in that kind of publishing.
Well, I mean, you look at Rory Stewart's book.
Yeah.
Rory Stewart is an unknown politician. I mean, if you follow politics like I do, you do, or whatever, then obviously you don't. But if you're not particularly following, you don't really pick it up. But he sold a lot of copies on the back of that podcast.
Oh yes, I mean the one he does with Alistair what's his name? Campbell. That's right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean the rest is politics is one of the most popular podcasts, particularly in the genre of politics and economics. I mean, and it's now got an American offshoot called The Rest is Politics USA, which is hosted by Cassie Kay and Anthony Scaramucci. So if you're fans of The Rest is Politics, you might want to check out the US version as well.
Yeah. I was recently, I'll just put it, it doesn't make it sound too grand, but someone came to me as a smaller publisher and said, how do we grow? What do you grow? Things have changed in 30 years from, I know it was all Nick Robinson. Nick had some great ideas, but you can't do some of them now. But there are other ways that you do it. It's always being open to fresh ideas and fresh avenues. And sometimes there's a friend from Penguin Days, Ian Johnson. I got involved with him with a couple of things which didn't work. And Philip Cottrell said, he said, whatever you do, Andy, he said, don't lose Ian. He said, he's going to make a lot of money one day. I said, all right. So the next product was classics, the old classics, but in beautiful end papers, beautiful covers, text laid out in a very beautiful way. And it's actually quite expensive. It was about 18 quid or 19 quid for the book. We're going back about 5, 6 years. And I thought, I don't see it. And my mate Hayden, who is fantastic publisher, Hayden Jones, and he said, don't touch it, Andy. And he was quite right in one sense. Actually, we were both wrong because it works. Their returns rate is about 2%. And for people who
Wow,
don't know, publishing
that's
return
very
rate can
good.
be anywhere between 15 and 20%. Their returns rate is 2%. And crucially, they're not actually selling through Waterstones. Waterstones won't take the books, but they go out through other alternative outlets and they just reorder. They're just doing incredibly well. They're in their fourth year and growing all the time. Children books. I'm not
Wow.
on a commission, by the way, but it
No, no,
just
no.
shows you. yeah, it just shows you what can be done, but takes guts.
Well, what it shows you is that you know, taking a decision to publish something it's you can moneyball it as much as you like. You can rely on algorithms to tell you what sold well last time, but it's very difficult unless you've done loads of research and you validated the fact that there's a market for something. You
Yeah.
can't tell. This is what makes publishing interesting. You can't tell which books are going to be the hit. You just got to go with your. You've got to do the research. You've got to go with things that you believe in, and then just go for it. You know. Anyway, Andy, well, we're coming towards the end of our conversation, so I do want to find out from you, because starting in the new year, we're going to have a book catalogue, an online book catalogue, which is going to be full of people's book recommendations. And every guest that I have on the podcast, I'm going to ask them for a book recommendation that they would like to share with the viewers and the listeners. So, which book would you like to recommend?
Well, I'll be brief, but you know it's impossible to ask a publisher for one book.
I know, I know, I know, I know.
The one book that I would take with me to the desert island is Aikenfield by Ronald Blythe, which is about life in rural Suffolk in early and mid 19th century. Do I mean 19th century? 20th century? Mid 20th century. But that's a very personal thing.
Yeah.
But there are three books, very briefly, I'm just picking out which it endorses what I'm saying about things changing. The first one, very briefly, is this one here, The File by Tim Garton-Ash, which is a really interesting idea, which he went back to East Berlin to interview the Stasi people who followed him. And people who, the generation coming through, don't know what East Berlin or East Germany was like.
Right.
Everything was followed. The File on Me, for God's sake, in Miles Strauss. You think, just extraordinary. The second one is a fantastic book called Freezing Order by Bill Browder. If you're interested in Russia and you want to know what Putin's doing, you have to read those books. There are two of them, Red Notice and Freezing Order. And Putin pursuing Browder because Browder basically showed him up for being a crook and head of the mafia gang and all the rest of it. And I went to the Orwell lecture last year, where I go every year, but Bill Browder was giving it. And we have it in the UCL lecture halls. And going in, what I used to do when I was doing my postgrad or whatever, and there were guys there with guns, or we were frisked when we went in. And then we sat down at the front. Behind Browder was a bloke who was geared up. And then behind the audience was a guy geared up with a gun who could see this. And I said, what nonsense for? They said, because Putin's put out a threat. He's going to kill him. In the heart of London, Putin doesn't muck about. He's just going for it. And then the final one, which I would recommend, because it's so relevant to today and what's happening in Syria and the Middle East, is a wonderful book, I think, by Thomas Friedman called From Beirut to Jerusalem. And he's a journalist, and it's just about the background to that whole area. The amount of ignorance that I get on both sides. Someone actually saying to me, Hamas are a great force for good. I'm sorry. The son of one of the Hamas leaders actually saying they're evil. So from Beirut to Jerusalem, if you really wanted to understand the background of what's going on, buy that book.
Well, thank you. And as you know, with these recommendations, I always name check the person that's made the recommendation, and then I then advertise something that the person who's made the recommendation would like to promote. So, what is it, Andy, that you would like to people in the catalogue, like a classified ad? What would you like to promote about maybe a project or a business venture that you
the
want?
literary trust, basically. They've been going for over 100 years. Any group organization, which is National Literary Trust, Book Trust, any group that's going into schools in particular.
Right.
And I can remember working in the community project, well, when my great niece was 4. And I was helping this family, a lovely West Indian British lady, and she said, "What did you do yesterday?" And then I said, "I went on my niece's." And I said, "I was reading my great niece a story." And she's very well uh, fed with stories. But my sister-in-law has actually said, "You know what you should do, Amy? You should write your own story." And I've never forgotten this. She was doing the flower like that, and she just put her spoon down and said, "You know, and already your children are ahead of mine." And I said, "Well, not really. Don't worry, Pearl. Your kids are bright. As soon as they get to primary school, they'll be all right. But keep that curiosity, keep that interest." So therefore, anybody going out reading to children who don't necessarily get the access because their parents are not interested or they're poor readers themselves, the parents are poor readers, do that. Because if you can't read, I got arrested recently for assault and affray, and I'm trying to break up a fight in Kingston, basically. But the point of the story was, the sad thing was, the bloke came down through questions. He said, "Can you read?" Oh, I said, "Well, I've been a publisher for 40 years." And he said, "I'll put down yes." I said, "Yeah, a lot of people say no." But the point of the story is, when I booked out after I'd given my witness account in the end, rather than being a fighter, I said, as a matter of interest, what's the proportion of English born, doesn't matter what heritage they have,
Yeah.
but what proportion of English born, British born prisoners come here and say they can't read? And here goes the figure, 10%.
Wow.
Which is obviously compounding the problem because they can't read.
Yes.
And that again is something that Jonathan Aiken, the MP who became a vicar, is very, very interested in as well.
Yes. Wow. Well, thank you, Andy. That was very interesting, and thank you for being a guest today on the Jolabokaflod podcast. Before I go, I'd just like to remind everybody that's watching, or if you're watching the future people who are watching the video, make sure you like the video. Make sure you click on the notification bell so that you know about future videos, and make sure that you share the video with people in your networks, friends and family, so that you can get to learn about what we've talked about today. So just to say thank you very much, Andy, and look forward to seeing everybody in the audience at a future podcast. Thank you.
Pleasure.